Good evening,
Part of the deal.
and welcome to our work session for the month of March. Could you all please stand, and we'll say this pledge of allegiance with our police chief? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll dispense with the roll call. We'll show that 2 commissioners are absent. Mr. Holmes is sick, and we advised him not to come near us if he's coughing. And Commissioner Lewis is on a business trip, a business commitment, long-term business commitment. So we're glad that Mr. Holmes stayed home. This is our work session. We typically operate under rules of, it's a 90-minute meeting. We cap it at 90 minutes. We don't cap our formal meeting next week. It goes until everything is decided. So we have several items there. I'd like to announce at the beginning that we did meet an executive session prior to this meeting on a personnel matter, and we did conduct an executive session there. And then also, we'd like to announce the acceptance of the highest qualified bid regarding the auction of the township property located on Glendale Road, known as 545 Glendale Road. And the public auction was held on February 27th, and came down to, there were several bidders. It came down to the final 2 in a true bidding form, and the property was sold to the highest bidder. It'll be subject to the ratification, their credit, and check cashing and all that stuff. I believe the price was around $315,000 for the property. And that'll be subdivided, and the new owner, once he completes title, will be public. It'll be public when the deed's registered, but right now he's still in the process of financing, so we will not announce who that was in case something happens and becomes the second highest bidder at some point or whatever happened. But so we're pleased to announce that that property has been sold. It will be developed into 3 home sites and 3 more tax rateables for the township. And we did protect the right-of-way for the public park, so that there's still a 10 or 12-foot cartway that connects the parks, and we're happy to announce that that has been done. The rest of tonight's meeting is a round discussion. We had promised the public that we would have an open meeting for library discussion. We have, one of the things that is on our plate is, one, the demolition of the Brookline School building, whether to go forward or not go forward with that. And then the other discussions that we still need to have and we'd like to have in public is some of the items that we need to consider on making a decision whether, as was put forth by our township engineer and township management a few months ago, on some of the options that we would have, basically remodel the current building, spend the amount of money that they can go through, or build a new building at the Brookline School site, and what that would cost and what that would involve, and different options there, and different price levels, and so on with parking and stuff. So we wanted to have sort of dedicate this work session to the topic of the library so that the public can feel and see where we are and get up-to-date information. We have other items on our agenda for next week, and if any of the commissioners want to talk about those, more than happy to do that. But this was promised by both Commissioner Hart and the other commissioners to the public that we would have a public discussion on the library. So I'll let that be what's going to guide us tonight, and if we get to other business, we'll get to it. Any other topics that commissioners think is burning that we need to discuss prior to next week when we vote on some of those things. Most of the items that we have to vote on next week are pretty routine. I don't think there's too much out of the ordinary, so I think we can, in all good faith, dedicate this meeting mostly to the library if need be, and that was our intent. So I'll open up the floor to anybody there. We've got, do you think it's update, if we want to get a quick 3-minute update on what those choices were, would you be willing to do that, Mr. Pannoni, or I hate to blindside you with that request, but.
I could do that.
Okay, and then I think that'll,
Just remind everybody.
yep, that'll get the discussion flowing, I believe.
Sure, would you want me to come up?
Sure, come on up.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Mr. Pugliese is here. He was going to give a an update on the plastic bag and plastic straw. If he can't do it tonight, can he do it next week?
Yeah, we can do it next, we can find room on the agenda next week.
We'll try to fit him in if we could.
I mean, that proposal was sent to the ordinance committee and to each commissioner to review last, Wednesday or Thursday, it was sent over. So I don't know if anybody's got a chance to read it in full, but we can talk about the highlights of it if we get time, if we have time left before our 90 minutes is up this evening. Dave? Well, thank you very much for doing that. And again, I apologize for blindsiding a little bit, but you're a professional, and I know it's not going to bother you.
There's a chuckle from the crowd when you said that.
Yeah.
So as the board remembers, that Dave and I were charged with looking at three options for the library as we go forward. For an option was to renovate the existing library. A second option was to build demolish Brookline Elementary School and build a new library at the Brookline Elementary School site. And the third option was to demolish the existing library and build a new library at the current location. And we vetted those three options, got some great assistance from Bernard and the architect who had done a lot of work on the renovating the existing and helped us in some of the concepts for a new library at Brookline. So briefly, the information I handed out last month, I assume the board doesn't have in front of them, or may have in front of them, but I could just run down those three options very quickly. The existing library is 31,300 square feet in size. The two options that were looked at for a new library were considered at 36,000 square foot libraries. As we know, we made those comparisons right across for all three options. The on-site parking at the existing library is 17 spots. Conceptually, a new library would be sized at approximately 70 spots. Very important point, if everybody remembers, the new library concept that was presented at Brookline to preserve the property was with the parking underneath the building. So it would have a two-story building with parking underneath the majority of the building. We ran through any required approvals, building permits, land development approvals for a new library, and land development approvals if we tore down existing. Relief, what we call relief. Relief is where we get relief from our zoning ordinance. We know we would need relief for a new library for certain bulk and area requirements. And we also know that we would need zoning relief if we put a new library at Mill Road, and we would need permission to tear down an historic structure. So then we looked at costs, and we had construction estimate costs based on both fairly advanced designs to renovate the existing building and a concept to build a new building at Brookline or a new building at the library. If the board remembers, we had construction costs, then we put what we call FF&E and soft costs on top of those, demolition costs at Brookline, temporary relocation of library costs, any work done at the new property. We put an allowance in there for off-site improvements at Brookline, and then we came up with three order of magnitude costs, about 11.4 million to renovate the existing, approximately 29.4 to build a new library at Brookline, and approximately 34 million to build a new library at Mill Road. I ran through that pretty quick, so I don't know, Bill, if that's...
Wait, Dave Berman emailed the presentation that you had,
Okay, great.
so everybody should have it on the computer, so.
All right, then it's good if it's in front of you, because it helps a little bit. A couple of other things to note. Just remember, that renovating existing has been advanced in terms of design. Any new libraries is conceptual at this time. So we all know the difference between concept and a hard design, but there were very logically basis for those concepts. A big part, again, is for the parking underneath the building. And one note on the existing building, renovating that, there's already been about $500,000 spent to date to advance the design and work on that option. So I get it.
That's a great, good
summary?
synopsis, so thank you.
All right, thank you.
And then any other questions you can answer from over there if you'd like. So there are pretty much the three options. The presentation was emailed. You can open them on your township email there on the computer. Any comments or questions to get started here? I'm talking to the commissioner right at the moment, so thanks, but I'll ask if we don't. I'll open it in a few minutes. If Dr. Hart, you have anything you want to say or? Oh, okay. All right, at this point, if there's anyone to do it, if any of you want to come up, identify, give me your name and address and tell us what you'd like, that'd be great.
Christopher Blackwell, 28 Mill Road. My question is, what will happen to the existing library building if the library moves to Brookline?
It's a good question. In all likelihood, we'd probably try to market it so that it would become a tax rateable structure. If the school district wanted to purchase it, we'd talk to them first, but my guess, and this is just a guess, this is my own opinion, I think if we vacated that property, we would seek to sell it to a developer and see the property developed into a taxable property.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, right.
Hi, Pat McClune, 512 Sagamore. Thanks for the time. I'll be brief. As it relates to the Brookline property, I'm sitting on a home on 500 block of Sagamore with no driveway. So I obviously have a personal feeling about something as big as this being taken on and the problems that it would entail, and been fretting about that all along until I saw the plan. And when I saw the plan, I started to feel better because I realized that how can anybody in good conscience spend $30 million on building a library? I think it's a non-starter at that point that we would spend that much money on taxpayer money for something so extravagant in a residential area when there's a library sitting in a business area as it is. So I can't imagine that anyone in good conscience would be able to vote and say that this is a good thing for the township. I laughed out loud when I saw the prices that were out there. It's absurd to think that we would spend that kind of money. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to stand up and speak? Please come up.
Hi, I'm Colette Bannon, 334 Sagamore Road. I've spoken before on the historic nature of the building and my desire to preserve that, not just for nostalgia purpose, but it was designed by a very prominent architect in this area, and I do believe it deserves a lot more consideration than it's been given to preserve that. But I also feel like there hasn't been much attention to the possibility of a fourth option of keeping that building and maybe trying to make that the library space. There's an auditorium section that is a fairly new addition that could be demolished for more parking. It seems like and I understand there's some sort of sacrosanct nature of the fields there, but why? I mean, I know maybe that was part of the dollar purchase or whatnot, but those fields are well used in certain seasons, but does like every single inch have to be, like couldn't maybe some of that basketball court or some of that area that's already asphalt maybe be used for parking? Instead, I just wanted to know the nature of that purchase perhaps.
I don't think we're restricted. We did purchase it in conjunction with an agreement with the school district, and it was for $1, and we agreed that we would use it for the benefit of the public in the township. So in other words, we're not going to sell it to a developer and put 12 houses there,
Sure.
or however many houses they could fit with the 50-foot zoning in that neighborhood. I mean, that was probably what was going to happen if the school district had kept it. They would have sold it for whatever they could have gotten it for to a developer if we didn't want it. But the school district, to their credit, said if the township wants it, and I think we as a board realize that there's not a lot of open space left in the township, and that it would be, if we could get that space even without knowing exactly what we're going to do it for, that it would be for the benefit of the township in the long run. That being said, we're going to look at the options, and, there's probably some of us, I'll not speak for anybody, but there's probably one or two people that say, hey, instead of, as the gentleman said, you can build a building for 30 million because we're under the constraints of the footprints of the park. There may be some people who say, hey, let's look at the alternative. If we don't have to have underground parking, and we
Right.
could encroach on there, we could make a nice public park
Exactly. Still a
that
lot of
looks
space.
sort of like Rittenhouse Square with a library and do some things, and then the building
Could
would
be
come
really
down
nice.
by 10 or 12 million dollars because we don't have to build a structure with underground parking.
Right.
So we're still looking at options. We haven't made up our mind. And the purpose of this meeting is to open,
Yeah, it just didn't seem
to
like
have an
that
open
was a
discussion, so-
fourth option at
Right.
all. And I feel like Mr. Goldsmith has been kind of misquoted because he's saying he doesn't, want that space for the library, but he was saying that because of the parking. But if we could create more parking and keep the building as it is, seems like it would be a win-win for everyone. I mean, that's such a prominent building for our neighborhood, and I have to say that conceptual sketch, really leaves a lot to be desired.
and again,
But-
that was a conceptual sketch.
I understand. I know, at very early
But
stages.
we're fully aware, I think, all of us, we understand some of the passion for the stonework of the building. If you go
It's in
through the
good shape.
building,
I did. It's in good shape.
it's not structurally. The school district had it strictly evaluated by engineers. Our engineer teams went through it. You can stand on the third floor and
I don't
look
know why
down
my
to the basement.
kindergartner was there.
And that's the
I had
reason
a
that it's
couple-
vacant. It's not a safe,
Yeah,
it's
I
not a
don't know.
safe building.
I-
But that's
I
more of an
disagree.
engineering decision
Yeah,
than our
I'm
decision.
not an engineer,
I mean, you
but
can
it
walk
seemed
through
like
the
it was
first
pretty
floor and
good.
see down into the basement. There's abatement that has to be done. It's the cost
There's
of,
gonna be
we did,
abatement even if
and
we
we
tear
did
it
put out a
down.
public meeting. The cost to bring that up to just meet minimal zoning and code requirements would be approximately $9 million. Just to make it a building that meets current codes and to make it habitable. That doesn't change the structure, the inside walls, which are cinder block and stone walls that are bearing walls, that would restrict its use by anybody. So I'll go
Yeah,
back to
we're-
the gentleman said, it would be absurd to put $9 million into a building just to bring it up to code, but not have anybody want to use it. Because it's just,
Yeah, but
it's
we're gonna have to have a
configured as
lot of
school.
zoning variances anyway
Right.
for
So,
whatever seems to be
So one of the things, if
happening.
we did, I mean, I'll leave it to the architects, I'm not the architect. I do see that the library's architect is here this evening, is if there's ways to incorporate any of those materials to transition them into the future of a building, I'm sure that they're gonna try and do that, because that's what the public is looking for. It would make it nice, it would do that type of thing. But again,
Yeah, there's
I'm
just
just
a lot of
speaking.
space there.
Right.
There- I think there's enough for park, there's
Well,
enough for
as in the
open
report,
space, and
in
there's
the initial
enough for-
report, there's the space there for a 36,000 square foot building, footprint of the current building,
All
so,
right, thank you.
okay? Anyone else? Anybody? Go ahead, sir.
Peter Patton, 703 Grove Place. I was curious as to I realize the bond market changes every day, but do you have any kind of projection as to the bond rates that are anticipated over the course of to fund the structure?
We know, today, it depends on when we
Well-
do it. If we did something, it would be probably over the course of 3 or 4 years that we would borrow. If you listened to the last meeting, we just approved borrowing that reduced our cost by about $1.2 million with the refinancing of the current bond structure. So right now, bond prices, borrowing is down, so it's an advantageous time to borrow. But you're looking at a time there, so we haven't decided what we're going to do, so I can't tell you when we would have to borrow. I would leave that to our finance people, Amy, our outside advisors, and our director of finance to address those questions. But I can't task them with telling me how much it's going to we're going to need to borrow and at what rate when we don't know what our costs are going to be. We haven't bid anything. We don't have an architect's plan. We'd have to bid it out and then it'd come to a conclusion that we're going to spend X or, 20 million X, 30 million X, whatever it is to do that. So at that point, and in today's world, I mean, rates today are advantageous. I don't have a crystal ball, and I'm
Yeah.
not sure our financial people are, they might be a lot smarter than I, but in 2 years, I don't know what the market's going to be.
Well, let me rephrase the question then. I guess the question would be, would it make sense to borrow, let's say, some money now without knowing the exact configuration of the
And
building?
we've allocated, I believe we've allocated in this year's borrowing for the first phase is whether we go forward with a redesign of a remodeling of the current facility or the initial cost of a new facility, the soft cost, architectural cost, land clearance. We have budgeted, or do have budgeted for the demolition of the building, if we go forward with the demolition of that building. That was allocated in this budget for this year. So
Right, but that's only $500,000. It's not a lot of money.
no, but that one line item is in the budget.
Right.
And there is other borrowing earmarked for library things.
Okay. So what you seem to be saying is you don't, until you have a clearer idea what you're doing, you don't have a clear idea of what,
Yeah, it's
how you're going to borrow
like I can't
money.
ask my dad for a number until I know what car I'm going to buy and how much help I'm going to need and pay back to him, so.
Well, to take that analogy the other way, you could be sort of setting aside a sum in advance in anticipating you
And
are going to buy
we
it.
try to be prudent. If we had an opportunity to spend money, we do have money earmarked for future construction and capital improvements that we could allocate that way. But we have some flexibility. It would take a vote of the Board of Commissioners to reallocate at that time, but there is some budgeting available. I don't know, Amy, do you want to say anything about that, or?
Sure. As part of the 2020 budget, we did plan to borrow $10 million at some point during this year. And if you remember from the budget hearing, we did say exactly that it would be seed money to start whatever project the board eventually decided to go down. It would almost fully fund a reno project, or it would give a lot of startup money for a total reconstruct project. So that is in the budget already.
Okay, and that would then be borrowed at roughly current rates.
Right, I forget the rates, they're public, we just,
The bond we're doing right now is just a refunding or a refinance of our 14 bonds. So this has no new money in it. So when we do, if we do borrow additional monies in this calendar year, it would be at the rates in effect then, which I believe the bond market as of this morning was on a 30-year about 1.5. So they're very good right now.
Yeah, okay. I guess that brings up the point that it seems like a very good time to borrow if you're going to be borrowing at 1.5 or
money is
potentially less.
good time to refinance a house. Yeah, this is a good time financially.
My other comment would be that having spent some time at different libraries, I think the importance of the architect and the interior design is probably more critical than even whether the building is a new building or a renovation. Having spent some time in the Penn Wynne Library, which is a pretty humble library in terms of its footprint and overall size, but there's a very good architect who worked on it, or firm and interior design, and it feels much more airy and open than it did. In contrast, Ludington Library spent a lot of money, but it feels pretty cold and impersonal. So I hope that's considered as you go forward.
I think you hit a nail on the head there with the one comment, open and airy. I think what our library board has done, and they're pretty good about it, have come to the conclusion that we don't know what the library is going to, a library of the future in 5 or 10 years is going to look like. So that we want to create a space that is movable, that they can move in and make it what it is today. You have things like makerspace and 3D printing and areas like that that would want to be done, but also that the interior is of such construction design and furnished in such a way that it could be reallocated within the footprint of the openness and change it to what it might be 5 or 10 years down the road, so that our library staff has the ability to rearrange. I think that's what I took out of one of the meetings with the architects and the library board and some of their presentations, even in the remodeling, so that you have flexible space, because none of us really know what the technology is going to bring. Obviously, we all look at a library and assume that there's going to be a lot less books in libraries in the future because of, Google, tablets, PCs, the ability to get information electronically. But there's still a need for volumes for research and other things, and people still want to read books and there's still reasons for that, but it becomes a gathering space, and to be able to have that flexible space, so, and that's one of the reasons that the Brookline School isn't a real, to renovate the Brookline School, because of all the bearing walls in the middle of that building. It was constructed with, classrooms on top of classrooms, that you can't retrofit that easily without severe construction cost to do that. I mean, you can maintain a wall outside, but the renovation has to go in the basement with the water, asbestos, and all the abatement issues with the building, because it was built in the 50s, is significant, so.
I was using it open in a slightly different way, in the sense that it allows a lot of light to come into the library.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so, which,
Okay.
I mean, I appreciate the need for a flexible space also.
Right,
But
and there's some people from the library here that can speak to that better than I can, I'm sure, so,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Anyone else? Anybody from the library?
I'm sorry, I
Ms.
forgot
Ms. Ben?
one last point. I mean, it seems to me this year we're embarking on this whole comprehensive plan, so why wouldn't we want to incorporate, our library space into that planning process and the best place for it, and what to do about our historic properties? I mean, there's all kinds of factors I feel like we're going to be talking about a lot in the next few months, so I'm hoping that this rush to demolish can be maybe quelled a little until we all have a chance to flesh that
I'm
out.
not, well, I don't,
Well,
I'll
there's,
take-
there's something on the,
well,
right?
we've been
There's
talking
a
about
vote
demolishing
tonight.
the building for a little over a year now,
I
so.
know, I'm just-
I mean, I'd like to think, government doesn't move at the same speed of private business. We've been talking for over a year, Dan, you're on the property committee, for, what to do with that building. I mean, we've had it studied, we've had the benefit of the school board's engineering evaluation of the building. We've had the benefit of our engineering evaluation of the building. And I think all the commissioners are aware of what the state it is and what it would cost just to bring it to code. But again, that's just the evidence that was given to us and what's there, so.
We've also been discussing the future of the library for over a decade.
Correct.
And we continue to hold them hostage, essentially, into their future, because they still don't know what it is.
Yeah, I think if you go back in the comprehensive plan, fixing and renovating or building a new library has been in there already, so. Since '88. Yeah, well, it is, because we didn't have that location before, so this is, as I said earlier, we got the benefit of being able to acquire that property. Good Lord's not making any more open space in Haverford Township. It was our opinion that we would rather grab it for the good of the public as opposed to selling it to a developer and having however many houses they could fit on that plot and do that. That was our goal. And, there's some days based upon some of these meetings, maybe we should have just let that happen. I say that facetiously, but it would have been the easier path for us instead of trying to decide what to do with it. But, so I'll let, does anybody, Lee, Scott, you want to talk about the sense of the library and what?
Sure, just to kind of share some information from the library.
If you would introduce yourself and your position with the board.
Sure. My name is Scott Lowe. I'm on the Board of Trustees for the Haverford Township Library, and this is,
I'm Lee Casaccio, Director with Bernardin and former Principal of Casaccio Architects.
and they're the architects that prepared the renovation plans, and they've been involved a little bit in some of the alternatives at Brookline as well. I think just a couple of things here. One is that the library board has passed a resolution indicating that we are in favor of construction of a new library at the Brookline site. And the primary reason that we're supportive of that approach is that it would afford us really the ability to address the primary concern of most of the people who give feedback to us about the library, which is parking. Right now, there are 17 spaces at the location we're currently at. And even after the planned renovation, we'd still have 17 spaces. So the single biggest complaint we get is about parking, and at the end of the day, that is what's provided really by the Brookline site that we can't get where we are right now. I think to speak specifically to the Brookline building that is there right now, one of our concerns is that the building we're in right now was built as a library. And it is a purpose-built structure. Yes, it was built in the 1970s, but and it does have a little bank addition on one end, but at the end of the day, it is a building built to be a library, and it functions pretty well as a library. If anybody's ever been to the second floor and been there when the sun was out, it's a pretty special space, actually, at the end of the day. So there are a lot of good things about that building. The Brookline building is not purpose-built as a library. And at the end of the day, it would require an awful lot of renovation to get to the place where the library could use it as a modern library. So I think if we're to move to Brookline, and the library is very supportive and very understanding of the needs of the township, meaning that if the decision is that we need to renovate at our existing location, then we're ready to do that. If we're ready, then we're also supportive of building a new building at Brookline. So I think, Lee, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Do you have any questions for me with regard to the architecture or any of the ideas for planning, either the renovation or a new library at Brookline? Because there's a lot of things I could say, but is there anything in particular that I could address or clarify?
Sure, if we were to consider building a library at the Brookline School location without the elevated parking, would there be a significant likely reduction in cost?
There would be, and I didn't have a chance to compare notes with Mr. Pannoni yet, but our preliminary estimates are, I think it would be on the order of magnitude of about 22 million rather than the 29 million, and with more parking. Maybe 90-some spaces rather than 70 spaces, depending on how we did that. There were, this was my boyhood library. You can imagine how delighted I was about 10 years ago to be selected as the architect when we set into the renovation of the existing library. And, we talked about the library of the future a little bit. The proposed renovation was, I think, as good as it could be in the footprint of the existing library. But in addition to parking, the deficit was that kind of open space that Mr. Wexler talked about, that flexible space that whether it's maker space or just accommodating uses as the library grows is what was tight in that renovation. Also, the use of the basement area was difficult. Mr. Pannoni's analysis last month was excellent, and if you go through the comparisons, the facts are clear, but there's facts behind the facts. So, for example, the area for the Mill Road Library was listed as 31,000 square feet, as opposed to a proposed 36,000 square feet for the new library proposal at Brookline School. I think Mr. Goldsmith last month talked about the 36,000 square foot program and why that made sense. He talked about that as a little compromise, but that was a reasonable compromise. The 31,000 square feet at Mill Road is not as usable because it's chopped up on 3 floors, and particularly that basement area is not going to be as usable. So, you might have a factor of significantly less than 31,000 square feet when you compare it to 36. It's very efficient and flows. So, that's one thing. Is there anything else I could help you with to analyze these different?
Question for Scott.
Yes, sir.
Scott, so the library is interested in building at Brookline. They're interested if the commissioners decide to renovate their space, but they're not interested in being at the school property, school building, the way it is now.
We
For
don't
renovating it.
understand how we can make a modern library at an
I just wanted to,
affordable price
yeah, I
in
just
that
wanted to
school building.
get that.
And we have looked at it a little bit. We haven't done the kinds of studies that maybe would prove that, but that's our belief.
So you think you're better off in the space you're in renovating that space rather than renovating the space at the Brookline School?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so your interest is in knocking down the school and building a new library there, or renovating the space at Mill Road?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And did you say that you have another design that would be less expensive at Brookline and have this more parking?
Yes, we looked at the possibility, if we did not put the parking underneath the new library at the Brookline School to preserve the fields, then we could provide a two-story library with about 90-some spaces on the site and save about $6 to $7 million
Okay, but
How
that would
much
be
of the
without,
fee-
that would be with the fields gone, right?
without the field.
Yeah, that'd be the fields completely gone.
Is there a concept as to what you would do with the field? I mean, and integrate, I mean,
The
tell us.
the
I mean,
idea.
that's a big change.
Yeah, so the idea, an option would be to save the money by not building the structured parking, which is significant. Build a very functional library, have about 90 parking spaces, and then create a park that would be both open to the library for breakout space, for outdoor reading, for children's area, and whatever, but also to be open for the neighborhood. It could be used by the entire neighborhood when the library is used and when it's not. So I think that would be a good option to consider anyway.
How big, I mean, if you're going to, I'd like to see the drawing. If you're going to make that, the library on that space, and you're gonna put 90 spaces and not use underneath the building, how do you have any space left over for any sort of fields or anything?
Now, it's not a field. It's a 50 or 60-foot swath of space that's part of the entrance, and it's part landscaping, and it's benches, and it's a little seating area. So it's more of a,
Most of it.
what did you call it, kind of Vest Pocket Park, or did you say a Rittenhouse
Yes, okay.
Square
Squares.
Park, or something like that?
Yeah, I'd like
It's
to
a
see
plot,
that
more of a
drawing, but
plaza,
you're-
it's not a park,
Right, so you're talking about paving most of that field.
with parking.
Okay.
And it could be 70 spaces. It's, that needs, 70 spaces would give more green space, so.
No, I understand. I just wanted to, and then I'd like to see that, if that's plan that's gonna be brought before the
I mean,
commission.
is that something that a computer-generated plot we could look at?
Yeah, before we start,
Yeah, before we got into real earnest, I mean, it would be good if we had a visual to see that, not only for us, but for the people who live over there.
That'd be all right.
So, I mean, I don't,
okay.
it's easy to talk about when you talk about 50, 60, 80 feet. I'm an engineer, but it's tough to conceive how it's gonna look. I know the modeling is much better than it used to be, but I think it would be, we would have to see something
Sure.
to look at that and, you know, obviously show the neighbors there, one of which is one of my kids, so I'd be, yeah. Yeah, so. Yeah, so I think that, you know, that would go a long way towards even, you know, us looking at any possibility of it. And again, these are possibilities. We're not talking about option A, B, or C. We're looking at possibilities. That's all. So, thank you, Mr.
Emilio.
Just, Scott, quick question.
Could you stand in and make Scott when you talk?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Membership, has that increased every year? Are you increasing every year?
I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head as I sit here. I believe membership has been consistent, and certain users has been consistent.
It was pretty high.
It is the highest in Delaware County.
How is that possible with lack of parking? How are you guys doing that?
Well, it's
No,
a
I mean,
legitimate
listen,
question.
I understand. I support the library. I think it's needed in so many ways. It's a conduit to inclusion and community information. And so but I just want to ask that question because quite honestly, residents have asked me the question.
It's a legitimate question. I mean, if you think about our library as in a urban location, I think Phil, our president of our board of trustees, one of the first things he did when he became president is he walked the neighborhoods around the library and counted 200 parking spaces. In other words, the observation was that there's a lot of parking in the neighborhoods. Now, the problem with that is that For example, take the parking along Darby Road. I mean, there are people that would be perfectly comfortable parking on Darby Road. I park on Darby Road when I use the library. But there are lots of people who might not be that comfortable parking on Darby Road. You can't really park on Mill. And then if you're not parking on Darby, you're not parking on Mill, and the school's in session, then you're really basically parking in the neighborhoods or across the street on Darby. The point I'm trying to make here is that our patrons, the people who come to the library, they come to the library despite the fact that they're not very happy about the parking. But they come. And I think that's a credit to the programs in the library and a lot of things, but it's also a credit to the facility itself. I mean, it's a beautiful building in a way. I know some people probably don't like it very much. I call it sort of disco modern style, but it's, it's on the second floor, it's a beautiful building. Right. It's just hemmed in and very difficult to satisfy everybody, I guess, at the end of the day.
So it's thrived even with its lack of parking.
It has thrived despite its lack of parking, yes, no question. Right. And, we've had studies done to come in and talk to us, and this was several years ago, to talk to us about what a 21st century library should look like. I mean, what if we were starting from ground zero, what would it look like? Well, one of the things it would have is over 100 parking spaces. Now, we are not asking for, advocating, or insisting on 100 parking spaces, but right, it's unrealistic. But the point I'm trying to make here is that 21st century library in a suburban location, really the advocacy is for a lot of parking. The other thing is that the space requirements that were suggested by these consultants, who are pretty well known in the library industry, were substantially more than the 31,000 or 24,000, depending on how you look at it, we are in, and even more than the 36,000 that we're contemplating for the new library, for a new library. So, and if you look at sort of how other communities have built libraries, right now, Haverford Township is on the lower end in terms of square footage devoted to libraries per resident and those kinds of statistics. Again, we're doing a good job with what we got, but at the end of the day, compared to other communities, we're not where they are. And I'm not comparing ourselves to Lower Merion.
And when you say we're not where they are,
Compare yourself to Lower Merion.
I'm not.
yeah. Where's I going to go now? As far as parking, is that what you're talking about? As far as parking
No,
is concerned?
I'm talking, well, parking is one of the things, but there's also
Because
just square feet of library per resident, books per resident, all those kinds of things.
But it's thriving, so I don't know how, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but it's thriving, so we're probably one of the most used libraries in all of Delaware County. Would you
We
say
are
that?
the most used library in Delaware County.
And so we are better than everyone else because it's being utilized there.
I'm not going to throw any stones at the library.
And Scott,
I'm pretty proud
with
of it.
the schools there, how will they get to the new place? If like, have you thought of like a bus or something that could allow them to get there? Because I think the schools there is why it thrives a lot, I believe, too.
It's not the only reason, but it's a good reason. It's a significant contributor. The library doesn't have any, I guess, plans to bus for sure. But at the end of the day, we're a community library. We're part of this community, and we kind of feel like, maybe there are some residents who are not particularly well served by our current location.
Commissioner Quinn brings up a good point, though, and that is that a lot of school children, after school, go there and start their homework, do research. I mean, I know my kids did it. And it was very convenient because it wasn't far from the school district. That concerns me, that now it's not going to be right there.
Yes, sir, I understand. There's tutoring that goes on at the current library as well, so.
Parent of three, and I know there's a lot of parents that I've talked to, that the library is almost like for a kid who's, 11, 12, 13 years old. It's a place for them to go you know, if the parent doesn't get home till 5 o'clock. or whatever,
Start their homework.
They can start their homework, do all that.
Research.
Yeah, exactly.
And the
And that's
libraries are
location. I don't
viewed
think
as
that-
the
I
new,
don't think
sorry.
that same student is going to walk from the high school over to,
Grade school, middle school.
Middle school ones are walking to the Wawa, then back to the library. If you're talking about busing, you should bus to Wawa, because when you go in there in the afternoon, there's just like a zillion
different.
kids.
It's different than walking to the library and getting food. It's totally different. Going to the Wawa with your friends is totally different than walking to the, on
Agree.
the opposite side of town.
You'll walk for food, but not homework, right?
This is true. This is true. I know a lot of kids who would walk for
You must spend a lot of
food
time in
and-
the Wawa, Bill.
And I think the discussions that we're having right here are exactly the discussions that we've had on, as the Board of Trustees. I mean, we understand, I mean, Bill Goldsmith, I think, says it best. There's the Haverford Academic Campus, and the library is part of that. And,
Yeah, I
you know,
agree.
there's a lot of good things to be said about that. My wife's an urban planner. She thinks it's a wonderful thing. It's not that we want to, the problem we have is that there are some downsides to that current location,
absolutely.
too.
Yeah.
And,
No
you
one's
know,
denying
so
that.
everything is a little bit of a trade-off. And one of the problems we have with our current library is it is on 3 floors. Now, we don't staff the 3rd floor. In other words, we don't staff the basement. But that means that community spaces are not staffed. There's nobody there. And that probably limits their utility. They still get used, but it probably limits their utility. If you look at the plans that, conceptual plans that have been laid out, you know, the community spaces share the same floors with the library itself, which allows them to be staffed and most likely would allow them to be more heavily utilized than the current community spaces are. Like, we talk about a makerspace. I mean, one of the problems with putting a makerspace at the current library is that we can't really, without increasing staffing, we really can't have a makerspace at the current library, whereas in a new facility, we most likely could. So there are real trade-offs that are made by deciding to stay in the current location. And, you know, it's a community decision. We're just trying to make sure that everybody understands what the trade-offs are, what you're giving up by staying where you are and what you get when you go to a new location and what you give up when you walk away from the current location.
You're gonna have to repeat it. If you want, everybody's gonna get a chance, but you're gonna have to come up and identify yourself, because this is televised, with your name and address. So if you wanna come up, more than willing, instead of calling out from the audience.
Don't go away, because my question is for you.
Oh, I won't go away.
Thank you. So Susanna Baruco, 805 Clifford Avenue, and my question is, how is it that an open floor plan allows you to use the same staff to cover more and larger spaces?
I wish the library director was here who could answer that probably better than I will be able to, but I can share my understanding. My understanding is it's kind of like the way they design hospitals. They put the nursing station in the middle, and then fewer nurses can see around and cover more space. Libraries, as I understand it, are essentially the same sort of facility, that a smaller staff can, maybe the right word is watch over a bigger area. But they definitely need to have staff on every floor where there are people. So if you have a 3-floor library like we have now, you either have to staff 3 floors or you have to have a floor that you don't really use very much, which is kind of the situation we're in right now. We have a floor we don't use that much. It's the community spaces.
$37 million covers a lot of staff.
There you go.
I'm not really arguing with that. I'm just saying that, you know, there are things that you get and there are things that you lose.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Lauren Brown, 508 Sagamore. Also a question for you. Aside from square footage and parking space, what else are you looking for in a 21st century library that we don't currently have? Oh, and library frequent user as well.
Well, I mean, if you're a frequent user,
To the mic, please, so people get home.
if you're a frequent user, you know that, probably you know, I don't know, maybe you don't, The current library was a 1970s addition to an old bank building. The bank was building, I think it was built in 1927, and it was kind of lost as part of the collapse of banking in the Depression. And the walls of that existing bank building are a foot or two thick, depending on where you're looking. The foundations underneath it are massive, and the headroom in the basement area there is minimal. And those walls really cannot be economically pierced or braced. So you end up with we have basically 2/3 of the library, which is a 1970s open plan design. And as part of the renovation, we're going to open it even more. But you still have the bank building, which is roughly 1/3 of the structure, which is not open plan and is very constraining in terms of the way the space is used by the library. And, that we do put as much as we can in there. I mean, there are office space in there, and there are kitchen facilities for the library staff in there, and but even the office facilities, one of them's kind of on a balcony. I mean, we do the best we can with what we have, but it's not ideal. As Commissioner Wexler indicated, if you were to go to a library that was recently built on a green field in an open area, you'd find that it's likely on one floor, and it likely is set up in such a way that it's completely open, but for sort of community rooms and tutoring rooms and those kinds of things. And that relates to function. It's just easier to operate a library over the long haul if it's laid out that way. It's not required, it's not essential, it doesn't stop the Haverford Township Library from being a great library, but it could be a better library.
Anyone else out there? Come on up.
Michelle Alvaray, 134 Hastings Avenue. I've been a supporter of the library for the 18-plus years I lived in this township, while also being one of the #1 supporters of parks and recreation facilities in this township, and I think the two can coexist. I do have a strong concern about taking all of the green space of the Brookline School and paving it over, which not only I can't justify in my mind needing 90 parking spots for the library at any given time, considering we do very well on 17, not that that's good, but the library usage is very high on 17 parking spots. But the other issue is the impact on the neighborhood. I know what Kathleen Court did to the homes in my area. We all have water in our basement ever since they built the homes on Kathleen Court 30 years ago. And that's just a tip of the iceberg of taking away green space that absorbs water and how you're going to handle that going forward. But in addition to that, not that we're concerned about not having enough parks and recreation facilities, it does concern me to lose a viable playground in a neighborhood that's not otherwise served by a playground. Playgrounds are usually for the younger age group, 10 and under. You need to be in a neighborhood in order to have a mom walk their kids on their little trikes or in strollers even. And to take that space away would be, in my mind, not in the best interest of that local neighborhood. So between the environmental impacts of paving over the land at Brookline School to make 90 parking spots and the lack of a local park in that neighborhood, I'd like you to consider those ramifications as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Siegel.
Just want to point out that the property committee, which meets in private because we're dealing with real estate matters, has in fact considered and has long considered with the Brookline School what you're just talking about. And we did have a plan, and we do, and I know the architects have looked at it, that would maintain the park area with parking, outdoor parking, both covered and uncovered, so that the community does not lose space. And there's been talk about the comprehensive plan. And I just want to point out, anecdotally, Our comprehensive plan was prepared in 1988, and that's what we're trying to update. The comprehensive plan was an aspiration. In 1988, the library had been renovated 9 years before, and the comprehensive plan called for the need to add at least 24 parking spaces back then and to purchase residences. It also recommended that the township building be replaced at that time. As we know, the township building has been replaced, but it didn't quite happen right away. So comprehensive plans are aspirational at best. And with regard to parking, the average adult resident of the Fourth Ward is 10 years older than the average resident of any other ward in this township. That's because I have a large senior community or multiple senior communities within the Fourth Ward. Those people don't use the library. As Scott talked about, people may park on, walk around the neighborhood, may park on Darby Road. Those residents don't. They go to Ludington. They go to other libraries because seniors, where we have one handicap spot in that whole area, simply choose not to use it. And that's a big issue, at least for me, because we pay taxes. And, you just got your tax bill. And part of that tax bill goes to funding, roughly $1 million a year to the library out of, a $30+ million budget, yet a large portion of this population in this township can't use that library. That's a big concern for me.
Yeah, I'll put in my 2 cents for the Ninth Ward. The biggest complaint I get is from families with children because of all the children programs that you have. They can't utilize that because they can't, 2 or 3 moms can't get together, unload strollers, and can go find a parking spot in time to make the children's program. So there is a significant need for parking, or not so much the people that live within walking distance of a library, but for the rest of our township. It's easier to go to Springfield or Marple because they have parking lots, they have children's programs, and they don't check your residency requirement when you walk in the door. So that's a common complaint I hear every summer for all the children's, and we have great children's programs. So I just point that out. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that there's a balance, that we've got a lot of people in the township that can't get, that don't come there because it's just easier to park at Springfield, Marple, Upper Darby, or Lower Merion, depending on the time of day, so.
I hear what you're both saying, and yet their membership either continues to grow or is the highest. So that's confusing to me. It sounds like to me it is being utilized.
Yeah, but Steve, it might not be being utilized by the group that Commissioner Siegel's talking about. If you're a senior citizen, you're not going there because you're not gonna park 3 blocks away, whereas.
I
can
appreciate
walk
that,
to
but we
my-
don't know how many senior citizens are going elsewhere. We have no clue.
We are sort of hearing from people that they're not using the library because of that.
I've never heard
Parking is
that.
an issue.
Not once.
I've
I
heard
think if
that.
you
And I
talk
have
to-
an older community where I live too. I've never heard that once.
I think you'll hear from Mr. Lewis. Everybody goes to Ludington out his way, so.
But it's closer.
Go ahead. And it's got parking.
My name is Kathy Case. I live at 121 County Line Road. I'm a senior citizen. I go to Ludington and I walk from my house. When I go to the Haverford Township Library, I find a place to park and I walk from that. So I think it's a misconception that senior citizens are not willing to walk a few blocks to go somewhere. I also would like to add that the comprehensive plan in 1988 was before there was electronic books and all the electronic things we have now. It was actually written in '86. So things have changed in the library world. If you look at what happened at Haverford College recently, where they renovated their magnificent library, an old building with lots of little rooms and lots of nooks and crannies and not an open plan. They did a survey of the Haverford College students, and you'd think these are really, in the avant-garde of electronic stuff and everything. 52% of them wanted to keep books. So it's not so that everything is turned electronic, and people still do want the books, but they were able to take an old building. I'm on the Historical Commission. We reviewed all those plans. And not purpose-built for a library, and convert it into, if you've been there to see the renovated thing, it's magnificent. Of course, they spent way more than probably the entire budget of Haverford Township on it.
I mean, to be fair, we don't have their endowment.
If you give us the money, we'll do that.
Yeah, So I can't imagine our current library, with all due respect, if looking at it and saying, would you rather renovate our current space or have a brand-new $30 million library? Who wouldn't vote to have the brand-new one? But, you know, it's not to say that you can't change that current space. And if people are still, they complain about parking, because sure, you'd like to park next door when it's pouring rain. But most of the people find places to park. I go to things at that library. I don't mind parking on Darby Road or anywhere else. That, you know, if you want to go, you go. So I'm just not hearing what the emergency is. And I've been listening to these conversations for a while, and do we have a crisis? I'm not seeing a crisis.
No, we don't have I would not classify anything as an emergency or a crisis.
Right,
We're
so
trying
we
to
have
do
time
what's-
to really study it,
Right.
and there aren't definite plans of what would happen with the Brookline School. We have seen some preliminary plans of the library plans, and I think we've spent $500,000 on those so far. And that was going to proceed, and everybody was sort of fine with that until the Brookline issue came up. So I guess I'm making a plea for, can we look at this and step back and actually get real costs, and maybe it's this, or I'm just not hearing the definite emergency that we have to do. I don't know what it costs to maintain the now empty Brookline building. That is an issue if we have to maintain that, make sure that's safe and everything, but it can't be all that much. So just my point of view, but and Ludington didn't add any parking places when they renovated their library. They counted on the town of Bryn Mawr to handle the parking.
You sound like you go to the library quite often, Ludington.
I do. I was a scholarly publishing. I love libraries.
So they're important. They're not,
They're
we
important.
can't do away with them because everything's going electronic, is what you're
But
saying.
I'm not hearing anybody
No
saying,
one's saying that.
No,
it's a
I'm
crisis,
asking a
no.
question. If you
Yeah,
don't-
No,
no
you
one's saying, no
can't-
one's saying that.
But Ms. Case, I think the issue is, though, that as you said, we were ready to renovate. And
Yeah.
whatever anybody decides or anything, the crisis is not in anything that's happening. The crisis is, the issue is the library has been on hold for 2 years. So all their employees, all their planning, everything has been on hold. So it's incumbent on us to make a decision. That's all that has to happen.
I understand that, but, you know, I mean, I listened to their proposals because they came to the Historical Commission a year and a half ago with those proposals. But again, it was, we need more open space for this, we need more this, and we need maker space and all the cachets of the current wording for libraries. But I didn't see it saying it wasn't serving the township adequately, and that some renovation could make it even better. That's what I came out with in their presentation. And obviously, we're concerned about the historic building, the bank building that's there. But that's not going to change if you tear down the Brookline School and build a new library. You still got to figure out what to do with that building. It's not the only one in the township, of course, that we're concerned about. So, I mean, you know, I guess I just think that looking at that, they had good plans for renovating that space, and they look like they might be cost effective. And now it's ballooning because of the Brookline issue.
Right, so maybe the decision is to renovate the existing space. And that's what has to be done, but I'm just saying a decision has to be made rather than just.
If you ask for my vote, that would be it, of course.
And I'm sure some people here would vote for that too, but I'm saying what we have to move forward and pick a direction, that's all.
That's,
And I don't think
agree
that's
with that.
contrary to what you're saying.
No, it's
as
not
opposed
contrary
to-
to what I'm
right.
saying. That's
So
what I'm saying. I don't see a
think-
crisis, but I think if
Right.
we have the money to renovate the space, why not?
Exactly, and I don't think it has to, I don't want to give the impression that it has to be a crisis for us to make a decision on the direction that we're going one way or the other. And you know, people have given personal opinions. I mean, the discussion that came up tonight about taking the field, for my own personal perspective, I always had the impression we gave the public in that surrounding neighborhood that we were going to keep that field with whatever we did. So for my own personal thing, that has to be, the field has to stay in some form or another.
Yeah, well, they're not making any more green space in our township.
And-
That's right, yeah.
right.
We don't want to pave paradise.
Good evening, Chris Connell, 500 block of Kenmore Road. Just a couple comments that, to me, I look at the 29 to $30 million and what have you, that's a lot of money. It's a lot more than this building, and I was wondering, could we put a library in this building, you know, that it didn't cost as much as $30 million. As far as taking away any green space, Sure, if you were to build a library here and you would have to take away a little bit of Veterans Field, yeah, the community would be very upset. So hence the community in my neighborhood would be very upset as well. But it's the impact of the neighborhood that I keep looking at. We're taking a facility that is the busiest facility, library in Delaware County. Whether people in neighborhoods aren't going there for one reason or another, certainly with a new library with 70 to 80 parking spaces, they will be going there. People, I'm sure with a new facility, a modern-day library, it's not just books on a shelf. Absolutely, it's also community center. It's also educational programs that come in there. It's also concerts that the library puts on presently today. So the impact of the community, when you put a facility, when it goes from a facility that was a Monday through Friday facility, closed on the weekends, closed after 5 o'clock in the evenings for the entire time that it was there, whether it was a school, whether it was the intermediate unit that was in there, everybody was gone over the weekends and everybody was gone after 5 o'clock. The weekends has a lot of sports programs that come in there. Not all year long, but seasonal, has sports programs through there. So the impact that it would have, the number of cars that would be introduced to the neighborhood from a 4-lane highway on Darby Road to a 2-lane roadway on Mill, you're going to a 2-lane roadway on Arlington Road to a single-lane roads on Kenmore and Sagamore. Introducing a brand-new building that they're going to promote the heck out of it to have people use, I think the impact to the neighborhood would be devastating at that location. I mean, it's really, looking at where it's coming from to where it's going would be too much. I think it would be too much for the neighborhood. Traffic studies, I'm sure, will be done, for any concept plan, I'm assuming, on what that impact will be. The other thing is, kudos to the school board. I greatly appreciate what they did, looking at that property and saying, we don't want to develop this. So let's, see if the township wants to buy it. They did the right thing. They didn't have the heart to say, we're going to develop that. I'm hoping this board has the heart to say, don't develop on that property. So thank you very much.
Susanna Baruco again, 805 Clifford Avenue in Ardmore. A couple of things. I looked, my takeaways from what was presented tonight by the architect and the school board, and mostly in thinking about the presentation at the January 31st meeting, when we had the slides of the cost estimates and the schematic designs and so forth. On the cost, I'm finding it hard to just kind of wrap my head around $9 million to bring Brookline up to code, but only $11,000 to renovate the existing library.
11 million.
11 million, excuse me, right, 9 million and 11 million. Even if you doubled the cost, so first thing, renovating the existing Dem 1 building new 29, and then demoing the library and building new on the current site, the most expensive option. Renovating is clearly the least expensive option. And even if you doubled that least expensive option by renovating Brookline, you would still be below your middle number of 29,000. I feel like the numbers still are not making 29 million, 29,000.
Just a few zeros
If
there.
only, then we could all go home. Again, the gentleman from the library said that and I don't mean to misquote you, thank you, Scott, that you don't really understand how Brookline can work. And my understanding is that you don't understand how Brookline can work as a library because nobody has been tasked at looking at that. And that's my concern. It was my concern when this topic first came up. And based on the numbers, it's still my concern. And I feel that the Board of Commissioners is really negligent on this issue.
I'll take
And that's a
exception.
strong word, but you have not looked at
We have
renovating
looked
that
at that.
library.
We looked at that, $9 million to get it up to code.
But you didn't look at
and we looked at-
rehabilitating it to turn it into a library and seeing how that fits into your
It's another
cost
$20 million
matrix.
to do that.
So you're at 29 million at demoing Brookline and building new. So it's pretty much a wash. So you haven't really looked at it carefully.
We have. The cost of doing that is if you tried to renovate that building structurally because of all the bearing walls of the classrooms, if you've walked through it,
I have walked
it's
through
chopped
it.
into how many, then you know how many classrooms it's chopped into.
Yes.
That's what holds the ceiling up. You can't remove those walls without significant structural improvements. Now, that would be addressed to the engineers and the architects, but when we got the preliminary cost on there, it was, both the engineers and the architects said, it's so expensive that it's not worth looking at.
Well, you just said 29 million.
Well, I'm throwing, that's what the cost of the new building is, with taking it down. You add the $9 million of there, plus renovation to take out the interior walls, restructure it, redo the foundation, dig down to get rid of the abatement, the water. And everybody says it's a great building, but when you go there when it rains, you need hip waders to go down the basement.
Well, it hasn't been really maintained.
It's been like that for 20-some years.
Well, maybe it hasn't been
With the senior
maintained for
center,
20
with the
some years.
daycare, with that stuff. It just, there was no money. And I appreciate the comment that the school board they didn't want to do that. The reality is they didn't want to spend $750,000 to demolish it when they thought we would do it. So it was, they were going to have to demolish it anyway, is pretty much where the decisions were. And that's where they're. So I don't think, I take exception with the term negligent because we've looked at everything
But you
down the
didn't
road.
really look at it because you never tasked an
You're saying
architect.
that, but you don't know. The property committee has looked at that. The engineers have looked at that.
And they looked
Cost
at
was so
putting it into turning it into a
You're
library.
getting over well into the 30s and 40 millions to renovate and then do.
Well, that's never been
36,000.
presented to the public as far as
but
I know,
there's-
has it?
It's not a realistic choice. It
Bill,
just. we're
there's
not gonna-
another issue here. There's not enough parking with that spot. There's not parking in the rest of in the neighborhood. Around the current library, there are other places to park. Around the Brookline School, I mean, the library did a great job of trying to put the parking on the lot and not affect the neighborhood. Unfortunately, that cost $30 million to do it. If you leave the building there, you have 40 spots. Those people need to go someplace else. There's not places in the neighborhood for them to go. We already have an issue on Brookline Boulevard. When the church, the Lutheran church has something, there's no place to park. So there aren't places in that neighborhood. You need to provide the parking on site. Otherwise, the impact on the neighborhood is too great.
Susanna?
Yeah.
I would just want to add to that, is
Yes.
that, first of all, the library has no interest in moving the library. If they're going to renovate a space, they're going to renovate their own space located at Mill, because that's where you're at the academic
Right.
mecca right there.
Right.
And so if you're going to have the same issues, why are you going to renovate at the school and then move everything over there? The reason why we're going through the moving is so they can have a new space. If we're not going to have a new space, we're just going to renovate the same. Why would you renovate the Brookline School?
Well, but when I say renovate, I don't mean take the existing building and keep it as it is and stick a library in it, right?
Again, we're not saying that at both places, but why would you renovate the space at Brookline and then move the library there? You can just renovate its space right now. If you're not going to build a new library with open space, the library itself doesn't want to move. It wants to stay at the location on Mill and Darby. And then you have more overflow parking at that location too. So I would not recommend, if it's going to be renovation of either property, I would just recommend that they stay in the space that they're at.
Well, then that's what I'm in favor of. I'm opposed to the demolition of Brookline.
Right. I just think in all of this, mean, Ms. Case talked about what Haverford College did, and it's all well and good, but all of this comes with a cost, as many people have brought up tonight. Like, there's not an unlimited budget to build a perfect library in the existing stone structure and also somehow magically create 100 parking spots. Like, there is cost involved in all this, and that's part of the decision-making, right?
Well, there's always a cost. I mean,
But
nobody's
so
saying that there isn't.
what the decision making here is, what are we prioritizing in terms of getting the best possible library for the community in one of the two spots for a reasonable cost? And taking that property at Brookline was not intended by this board to save that building.
Well, then I would suggest that it was a mistake that the school district gave it to us, because I would rather have seen the school district sell it like they did with the Lanark School and let it be developed that way, because that building was saved and put on the National Register, and this building could have as well. So it's unfortunate. Thanks.
I have one more comment. So we're a community that encourages walking and biking. We've created bike trails. We have senior citizens that say they do walk to the library. I don't think we truly know how many people, I mean, parents drop children off there and tell them, I'll pick you up. I want you to work on your project and I'll pick you up, even on weekends. So I don't know if we really, or if we do, Dave, maybe I'm wrong. Do we know how many people do that? Drop off their children? How many people are walking there? How many people are biking there?
We don't know that.
We don't.
I know the library's done some anecdotal studies, but nothing.
And unfortunately, I don't have it at my fingertips or on my.
How many employees, Scott, do you have during the day? Do you know?
I think the library has, oh my, be embarrassed here, like.
Yeah, 9 full-time and 30-ish.
Part-time.
9 full-time and 30 part-time
30 small, 32, 33.
during the day?
Part-time people, yeah.
Not every day,
Not every day. So I'm talking about a typical day. How many would you have? About 9 full-time, definitely?
10 to 12. Probably 10 to 12.
10 to 12.
Probably the right number.
Okay. And do they use any of the 17 spaces, or where do they park? I'm just curious.
They're directed not to.
All right.
do
I would hope so.
They're directed to park in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope that they wouldn't park there. Okay.
Mostly on the other side of Darby, so they're not impacting.
So they're not impacted. Okay. I figured that. I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kristen Wise. I live on 516 Sagamore Road. Can we just have clarification? I know at previous meetings that we had, it was said that the fields would be left, absolutely would be left, and that was not up for discussion. Is that correct? That was said in previous, but now we're talking about possibly.
No, he gave that as a possibility.
He said
I
that
thought
tonight.
that was not a possibility.
Well, just to demonstrate to us, the question was posed to them, what would the difference in cost be if we didn't have underground structure parking there? And I think the architect came back and said it would be roughly $7 million less money.
But in your eyes, in the board's
And that's the
eyes,
first
is
we've
that
heard
an
of it, too.
option to get rid of the fields?
It's not really an option, it's just their presentation this evening. That's the first we've heard of it. Right, and that's still not getting rid of the fields.
Putting 90 spots there?
Well,
Would
90
you be able to do that without?
It would put a
That was
parking.
not one of the three options presented to us. And
That was an appendix to the other option, is what they were saying.
Our three options were given by the township engineer, Mr. Pannoni. That was brought up by the architect for the library that gave us preliminary plans for both a renovation and a design at that Brookline site. I can't speak for anybody else on the board, but as I said earlier, I was at those meetings. That was said to the neighborhood in that community. As far as I'm concerned, no plan should be able to be passed by this board unless those fields are preserved.
Yeah,
And I'm just speaking for myself.
And Mr. Pannoni and the township manager were tasked with to provide those three options. The property committee has looked at others, and as I've said, there are options that we saw that could put 70 parking spots that would still preserve the fields. But that was not what Mr. Pannoni and Mr. Berman were tasked with providing us now. Based on the costs, we're re-exploring that option because it's a significant cost, but it still preserves the fields.
So, and then we have spent $500,000 in trying to get plans so far for
I don't
this
know the
site.
numbers exactly.
Well, the library has
That was
spent,
said.
has spent money over the last 4 or 5 years, but that included renovations to there. They've renovated the basement, they had to do a heating plant, they had HVAC stuff. They've got soft costs with architects and engineering to see how you could do a renovation in that building. I mean, at the end of the day, they've done a lot of work in the basement. I go down there for meetings, it still smells like a basement, but it's been renovated.
So I guess what is the board's plan with this then? Are you going to make a decision based on what these three options are? Or are you going
Go
to
way heavily into it.
explore more
If we
options,
task the
spend more
engineer,
money?
if we look at any other, we'll probably task our township manager and the engineer to advise us if there's any other, if in addition to those three options that we currently, if there's any other feasible options that would meet with the criteria, such as saving the fields or whatever, to do that.
And there's no set time frame yet for decision-making?
We're not, I don't think we're under a gun, other than the fact that we've stalled the library in the renovation project for about 2.5 years now. So, and, you know, we want to get this thing moving. We've done the borrowing for anticipated project. We, as Ms. Cuthbert said, we could probably pay for the bulk of the renovation project with borrowing that we've already established, and then, or do a first round of a building, you know, if it was double that. So, and, you know, renovations are expensive, but so is new construction too. So I don't think there's any preconceived decisions made by anybody here. I know I haven't made up my mind. I'm still gathering information, as probably all of us are, and then we'll discuss it, and we discuss it probably again next month and do that. We were under the gun on the demolition, so to speak, but our staff was able to negotiate an extension on the bids for at least another month or so to extend those. What was the extension on that, Dave? Was it
March 31st.
March 31st until, so we're a little bit under the gun. We'd have to reopen the bidding process to demolish the building if we're not. So if we're not gonna, we can still demolish the building and build a new library there or renovate there. If we demolish the building, the park gets bigger, we get more green space, because we don't have another project that we would put there, but it would be, future generations of this township could then decide what to do with that space. And we wouldn't have to be up here and get yelled at, but it would be, our kids or our grandkids would be deciding that way down there, so.
Okay, and then I'd just like to echo what Chris Connell had said about there's dollars and cents put on these papers about decisions, but I don't think enough is going into the discussion about the neighborhood and how that would just change the entire scheme of that neighborhood there. And I don't think that's not written down on paper, it's just dollars and cents that everybody's looking at and not.
Oh, no,
how the
I totally
neighborhood-
agree. I know people that live 2 blocks away, and I'm getting feedback, we would love to be able to walk to the library. But the people that live on that block, different situation. The people that live on Kenmore and Sagamore, and face it,
Well, just the traffic. People that live 2 blocks away are still gonna have to drive through all the traffic
I don't-
that it's gonna create there.
I'm
they
sorry,
would walk, they would walk.
Can I just say, ma'am, that we do look at that sort of stuff. When I make a decision, I know the rest of the commissioners do the same thing. It's not dollars and cents. It's about neighborhoods. We all live in the neighborhood. Jerry lives in that neighborhood. I'm not too far from there. So we're looking at all that sort of stuff. When Commissioner Connell, I've spoke to Commissioner Connell about this very issue many times. And so we do look and see what's going on in the neighborhood, and that goes into making these decisions.
Okay, thank you. I would hope you would. That's
We
great.
do.
Thank you.
Again?
Again, I just have a question, and I know forever that we've talked about the library, the thought has come up of the availability of buying one of the houses next to the library to expand the parking lot. And I know we bought a house next to Steel Field to expand parking there, and we put a semi-permeable parking lot in there that the water permeates, so I just,
Now been paved, by the way.
what?
It's been paved this
It's
time.
been paved over? Okay.
But there is water retention plans that go in there. Anything we do, construction anywhere, the engineers have to design that water retention and runoff system. It's you can't build a new house in here without putting a 16-foot front pool of stone in front of your house and percolating water down to it. Things have changed since buildings were built 30, 40, 50 years ago. They didn't have land development plans that included water runoff and stormwater runoff, so that's a high consideration. It's a big cost.
Yes.
So.
Michelle, but to answer your question, it has been looked at, it's continuing to be looked at.
Okay, so granted, we're not kicking anyone out of their house, but if a house came available to expand, that's a possibility for the future.
We're not ruling it out.
Okay, thank you.
Come on up, sir. Chris.
Christopher Blackwell again, 28 Mill Road, just one house away from the library. 3 times during the 25 years that my wife and I have occupied our house, corner property, we've got out our pitchforks and our torches and gone to the library to bitterly complain about the idea of any purchase of residences in the neighborhood. And as to the neighborhood, you know, it functions pretty well on a normal day, as long as you ignore the 1-hour parking space immediately opposite our house. But hey, there's a nice sacrifice to make. It makes it easy for people to get to the library. I was, at a certain point, president of the Board of Trustees. I resigned because of the idea, because the rest of the board took a vote, which I could not support personally, to try to acquire properties in the neighborhood. I said, I cannot do that. I cannot do it as a property owner, and I cannot do it to my friends in the neighborhood. That's the fact. And we'll do it again if it gets raised again. Thank you.
I think we see what the impact is on neighborhoods again.
Yeah, sorry, I was promised my last time. Colette Bannon again.
Because we're
So Lower Merion has what, 5 libraries? And we have 1, and it seems like that's a great location for our main library, and that maybe we need a little outreach to have some satellite libraries and put that $30 million into more staffing and more, coordination with that sort of thing. The Brookline School, I'm going to appeal again. It's a beautiful historic. It could be a really, really lovely building. Could be great, like senior apartments for people who want to stay in Haverford Township with a satellite library, down the hall or something. The CREC could have a satellite we should be doing, we have residents all over the place that you talk about, they don't want to come and park. Maybe they could have a library satellite in their neighborhood. Has that been discussed or thought?
That would be a library decision, not ours.
Okay, I'm just putting it out there as a possibility. But I will appeal again, if this demolition order is on the agenda for tonight, or is it voting on tonight? Okay, because I'm going to appeal again. I think it really could be a lovely building for something. Probably not the library, but for something beautiful. It's a beautiful building. Thanks.
Go ahead.
One more quick question. I understand that you will decide whether or not you're demolishing the Brookline School. When will we have visibility into what that timeline for demolition looks like and how long I'll be living across the street from a construction site?
I think, Dave, can you answer what the timeline for a demolition project would be?
Let me give you a concise answer. When the job's awarded, if the job's awarded, then a contractor has to pull together what are called bonds and insurance and execute contracts. That typically takes about 4 weeks. Then during that process, we will get a detailed schedule from the contractor. What happens first is remediation of the building, which from the outside won't be too obtrusive because it's remediating the inside of the building. Then the demolition will start. I don't want to speculate on a timeline because that's a contractor's job, give us a finite schedule. So the inside part will be about half the time, the outside part will be about the other half. I think the police station here took 2 to 3 months, just to give you an order of magnitude.
Okay. And what does that mean for the interior part? I don't work in.
The project, the building, anytime a building is demolished, there's certain environmentally sensitive materials, asbestos, lead. You can't just demolish the building. Those materials have to be removed. That's what we call remediate the building.
Okay.
Then the building gets demolished.
Okay.
That makes sure that, contaminants get in the air and get in dust. So it's a protective part to remediate it first.
And then the plan would be to hopefully have a decision about what's happening to that property before it's being demolished or during the demolition 2 to 3 month period?
probably during, I think, the discussion of what we're gonna do. I think we're getting closer to making decisions because of cost figures. I mean, I think cost is driving us. I mean, I just heard a suggestion. I don't know if Susanna's in the neighborhood. I mean, would the neighborhood really want condos there?
No.
Okay,
I mean,
that's,
not me,
I mean, it's nice to say things, but I think realistic.
We can't put condos
No,
there
I know.
either. I mean, part of the agreement. I mean,
I'm
that's,
just-
this
I'm
is all,
asking-
this is all circular. Like, we
I'm
can't
asking a
put
question.
condos there anyway.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I won't speak for the
So,
neighborhood,
anyway,
but for
yeah.
myself.
So I hope that gives you this time frame. Roughly, this was about a 3 to 6 month project to tear down the old police building. This had some severe slopes, tough demolition, but they had to remediate it for a couple of months.
Would there be ever a possibility that there's a demolition done without a decision made? Because multiple people have mentioned this library has been a discussion of this board for a decade now, so.
I don't think, I mean, we probably have a rough idea if we're gonna demolish it. There's other considerations. We have to sit with the engineers and find out what the status of the building is. Right now, it's being called an attractive nuisance. Kids could go in playing there, squatters could go in there, you could break in. So it's probably a detriment to the neighborhood as it sits. It's a possibility. We don't want anybody to get hurt there. We do have to maintain it. We've probably got the utilities are shut off, so pipes aren't freezing. It's not being heated to any degree because the boilers, we'd have to replace the boiler. That's $300,000, $400,000 right there for an HVAC plant. A heating plant with no air conditioning because it doesn't have ductwork for air conditioning or anything like that. But
Yeah.
so we have to look at that. But my sense is, and you guys jump in here, it wasn't supposed to be my talking show, is that we probably have a pretty good idea what we'll do before we would demolish and do that, because we'd have to rent it. If we're not gonna put a library there, then we would have to have the funding to grade it, put a park there, and make sure that it's a walkable park, no parking spots, no macadam, it would be all grass.
That would be nice.
Yeah, so.
Well, I mean, it not being definite before demolition doesn't really sit well with me as someone who lives across the street from the neighborhood, or from the building as it is. So, just visibility into that timeline as soon as the decision's made
I mean, if you
about
look
the
at it
demolition
just on
part of it.
a logistical part, if we're not gonna build a library there, we probably have to take the building down for safety purposes anyway. I mean, that's, we're not gonna spend, as Mr. McCluskey said, it doesn't make sense to spend $9 million to bring a building up to code that nobody wants to use.
Sure.
Because you can't do the interior is not suited for anything. That would be a use for the neighborhood. We're not gonna put condos there, we're not gonna put businesses in there. Anything you do there is gonna, if you put a use in there, you're gonna need parking.
Hey, Bill, I'm not sure I agree that, we're doing the comprehensive plan. One of the things I'm hearing consistently is the need for a senior center, which was what was in the building, need for childcare. If the building can be renovated for $9 or $10 million,
Well, that's all well and good, but that's not gonna be our cost. That's gonna be a developer that's gonna develop it for a child care, senior care
We
center.
have never been a
We're not-
landlord.
We're not a landlord, we're not allowed to be, I mean, it's just,
once the building's down, it's gone. And I do think the building,
We are not a landlord.
we own the creek. And we use it as a recreation center. Right. I mean, if we put a recreation center there, we're gonna need parking. Right?
I agree with you. I agree
yeah, I
with you. We
think,
should look into some of
I
these
think at this
things.
point, if we can, the building is not being used by squatters, people are not breaking into the building.
It's because
That if we wait,
we're being supervisory.
right, and we could be supervisory for the next 9 months and get through this plan, and if there is a possibility of reuse of the building, I think we should explore it. It's a building, it's over 100 years old. At the time the building was built, there were 5,000 people in Haverford Town. 15 years later, the population had quadrupled. It's a statement, I mean, it is something from our past that I just don't
No, I
think we
agree.
should be in a hurry to knock down.
I agree with you 100%.
Jerry,
I'm with you, Jerry.
Commissioner, I agree with you as well. If you
I
can do
agree
it,
that we
do
can't
it.
do it, that we shouldn't do anything until we exhaust everything.
I agree. Don't knock the building down until we
No, but I think-
have exhausted every possibility.
I think what the commissioner's saying also is if we could utilize it now for the next 9 months if it's usable. Is that what you're saying?
I don't think it's usable at the moment, no.
It's not usable.
Absolutely
Okay,
not usable. It is a liability that we are
Just leave it.
carrying.
Just leave it the way it is.
Just leave it the way it is, and then we can work through, once we work through this process, then, you know, if we knock it down, it is gone. If we could possibly save it somehow, figure it out how to do that, I am all for it.
Yeah, I mean, if we can find somebody who wants to develop it and use it, that's,
Use it for childcare.
Surrey
for-
Center or something like that, yeah.
Yeah, something to benefit the neighborhood, benefit the township, I'm all for it. I would not like to see this building come down, as much
but
as,
just remember, if we allow somebody to develop and use it, like a Surrey Center, Senior Center, they're constrained by our zoning laws, the number of parking spaces they need for square footage. Again, it's a 36,000 square foot building. I don't know the numbers, but it's a substantial amount of parking spots would be required, so.
I agree, but we could, you know, that's a zoning issue.
Right.
We can work through some of those issues.
29.
29 or
Yeah, we're going past our time.
But in its current configuration, it is not usable.
Correct.
And that's from every engineer.
I will take one
or
more speaker. We're past our 90 minutes, so go ahead.
My name is Jim Brown. I live at 720 East Manoa. I am a library board member. My question is, if there is an alternative use of this building, are those alternative users obliged to come up with enough money to pay for the bond issue for remodeling? And if so, do we have any alternative users who would have the economic ability to do that?
That is what I
That
think
would
we need
remain to be seen, right?
Yeah, that,
Sir, did you want to come up real quick, or you look like you wanted to jump up? No? Yeah.
oh no. It's Vince Cunningham.
How you doing, guys?
Good, Mr. Cunningham.
Vince Cunningham, 539 Sagamore Road. I'm 3 doors down from the Brookline School site. And last month, the president of the library was here, and he said his ideal spot, and the library's ideal spot, is Darby and Mill Road. So it sounds like they would be good with that renovation going on there, and he even touched on real estate around there. Not saying the house right behind, but there's other buildings along
I
there.
think you came in a little bit late. The library board had passed a resolution saying their first preference was the Brookline site, is what they said this evening.
Oh, well, he said last month that
Right, I mean,
Mill and Darby Road.
Yeah, based on the cost, I think he said.
Because he called it the education campus, where the school, it's near the schools. So I'm against the library going to Brookline, and I am for the renovation of the Mill Road location.
Duly noted.
Thank you.
It's when Mr. McGarity taught me early on, if you put a stop sign at one corner, you've affected the other corner, and taking down a property would affect the Mill Road residents and create a snowstorm there. So I thank everybody for coming. Our 90 minutes is up, and we appreciate the discussion, the candor, and we've gotten good information from you, so thank you very much. Meeting is adjourned.